I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zies Palmer.
And this is Arcade Mark. Hello everyone! This Twitch stream is filmed in front of a live audience. It is not fudged or retconned. Or is it?
Ooh.
It's mysterious questions that we will not know. So, we're here today to talk about fudging and retcons. So, fudging and retcons are two topics that tend to be pretty contentious, like, no matter what.
So, we should start by defining what they are.
That's true. If we don't define fudging and retcons, then people don't know what we're talking about. So that's what we do every time here.
So there's a few different things that typically fall under the umbrella of fudging. One of them is the idea of dice fudging, where, you, as the GM, present a result that is different from what the dice that you rolled would have otherwise indicated.
Yep.
And another one is that can be more subtle, is behind the scenes altering certain facts or factors about the encounter that based on what's going on with the PCs. So, for example, another one that might fall into that category is stuff like hit point fudging. Like, you realize, this creature is gonna wipe the floor with the PCs. They're too tough, so I'm just gonna say that last hit was enough. Or like, oh man, my boss isn't gonna last as long as I would want, and so I'm going to add some more hit points to it. Or other sort of changes to the stat block that are different from what you had initially put in there.
Absolutely.
Then there is, but as you start to move along the spectrum, things become a little less obvious about whether or not they're fudging, right?
Yes.
Like, if you had a certain set of tactics in mind for these creatures, for example, and you had written down like, this is what I'm planning to do, and then you decide afterwards, like, this seems a little deadly. Actually, I'm gonna say that they're tactics or something like that.
Or if you're not sure how easily another group of creatures in the next room heard something, or like, would they take a round to respond and like grab things, or are they gonna go right in? Making those judgment calls that really could go either way, just in a way that like maybe would be better given what the situation is in the current fight, and then just sort of erring on the side that is going to be more interesting, like if the PCs are crushing it, maybe getting the reinforcements sooner, and if they're struggling, having them take longer. That's another form of fudging that is yet again something that is just continues blurring the line, because I think that like every group has their own definitions of fudging and their own social contract for fudging and retcons. So yes. When it comes to fudging, I think there is no one definition, but we've given a few possible definitions. So let's talk about retcons though. With retcon, unlike fudging, where it's just sort of like a euphemistically, like, it's a euphemism for a type of like cheating or changing things based on their expectations in a way that is purportedly good for the game, and could be depending on your social contracting group, in the same way that like people make lots of euphemistic versions of things that sound worse when you use the like harsh terminology. Retcon has a pretty defined definition of basically something new that comes in that basically tells you that all the previous stuff that you knew, or some previous information you knew, is wrong, and that you're just adjusting and changing it.
Yeah,
it stands for retroactive continuity, because it retroactively is putting continuity in the past. It doesn't always mean it contradicts. Sometimes a retroactive continuity, like the original, was just like something that theoretically could have been true, even though it wasn't really. And now when you see it, you go back and say, okay, that retroactively is in the continuity. But it's usually used nowadays to mean when it actually just literally contradicts the previous continuity.
Like, for example, if you had stated something to be true about a particular aspect of your setting, and then you realize, oh, actually, you know what, this is going to cause an issue because I have a player who really wants to get in on a theme of like being a traveling merchant, but that's not really a thing that we had here. Or like you realize that you had set up a plot or a set of schemes for the villain, and there's a hole in it. It doesn't actually work. And so you're using a retcon to say like, oh, actually, you know, when you discovered this information here, what you actually discovered was this and this. I realized there was a contradiction in my plans, and that wouldn't make sense. So you got this instead.
That's right.
You also have the kinds that are on a more like, because those can be on a more like between sessions or like sweeping basis. And then you also have the ones that can be more like within a section, based on players' decisions for their characters, and sort of being able to take that back. And each group will have a different sense for when that's acceptable.
Yep.
Like for example, you know, if the character
we'll get
says,
into we'll get into the social contract of retcons later. We want to make sure we define both fudging and retcons.
Yeah, but I was gonna give like a couple of examples of that, whether it's like, oh yeah, you know, wind back a turn, or whether it's like, oh, you know, wind back a strategy or things like that. That think about that as sort of the time reversal retcon or the decision reversal retcon.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so why are fudging and retcons in the same episode together if they're fundamentally reasonably different and can be used and deployed in different ways? The reason why Linda and I decided to put them together is because of the fact that fudging and retcons both are tools that are sometimes maligned, sometimes very unpopular, and depending on your social contract, you might not be able to use them at all, or you might use them a lot. And like, look, I get it. Our group has a social contract that is very anti-fudging for certain types of fudging, like dice fudging, right? So that's why we wanted to talk about it, because when it comes to either fudging or retcons, you want to get the definition down straight, and you want to talk to your players and GM about both of these topics. Figure out where your group sits, because this is the kind of thing that can make the other players that you're playing with very unhappy if you wound up having a different idea of what the social contract was for fudging and retcons.
Yeah. So, like, yeah, Mark was saying, like, our home group, very much no dice fudging, but, like, tactical alteration is fine, and the kinds of retcons that are, and then retcons they're generally a lot more okay with.
And it looks like we have a hype train. But yeah, absolutely. Our group uses retcons extensively if something comes up. Because we're Theater of the Mind, you kind of have to allow a few retcons with Theater of the Mind. So, basically, when it comes to fudging and retcons, you want to talk to people about which of them you'll employ, in what degree, and why. Why you want to employ them, or if people don't want to employ them, why they don't want to employ them. For instance, in our group, it's been pretty fundamental that we don't like dice fudging because we want the results of the outcome of our decisions and the random die rolls that influenced our decisions, because we knew they would come in there, and we tried to make decisions to, like, minimize the number of die rolls that would possibly screw us over, maximize the number of situations to our advantage, but we want that to be let as it stands. On the other hand, other kinds of things that might be considered fudging are fair game, because of the fact that, you know, there could be things that the GM misjudged, and so therefore they could decide not to, like, add in 20 different encounters that are just going to turn into an extreme plus encounter.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do. My group went backwards into a dungeon in Cradle of Night. They beat the boss, but then they added every other encounter in the dungeon. But they were, like, some rooms apart. Some people were sleeping and didn't have their armor on and their weapon. And so I played them out as it stood, and they had this running fight that just reminded me of some, like, big famous scenes where, like, just a bunch of mooks keep piling in, where a bunch of mooks kept piling in. It got bigger and nastier. They needed that life oracle that they had who could do burst healing. It was rough, but they beat the entire dungeon that way.
One of the ways that I sometimes consider when GMing areas is that there might be a range of possible truths about what the overall difficulty of, say, the dungeon is. And I know, we have these linchpin encounters, and I know how all of those work, but I can then feel that I can decide more on the fly. Where are the guards situated and in groups of what size based on what's going to make things more interesting for the players.
So sometimes
if I'm noticing that things are seeming really easy for them, I might decide on sort of a more aggressive strategy of guards that requires more more rolls or is a more difficult combat. Whereas if it's like, oh gosh, that was overtuned, then I can think of a reason why maybe things are more split up, or people are less prepared, or things like that.
So sometimes you have groups that are incredibly simulationist, and they're like, no, this is the world as it was written down in stone. And so therefore, once it was decided, that has been decided, and that's just what it is. But I think that even 90% of groups, at least, allow a little bit of retconning, and the amount of retconning they allow. Now, this depends on how you deal with people who are missing for a session, which we've had, I think, an episode when people don't show up, and scheduling conflicts. Because any group that allows people to be missing for a session, and therefore they'll run it at 4 of 5 or 3 of 5 players showing up, or if it's 6, 5 of 6 or 4 of 6, has to allow for the possibility of adjusting the encounters for the number of people who actually did show up.
Yes.
Unless you basically are okay, we never have encounters that are severe for the full group of 6 ever. Because they would be extreme plus when it was down to 4. We'll run with always at least 4. And that would make the things that used to be moderate severe. You could
or if
do
you
some
have,
things
it might be possible if for something that is sufficiently sandboxy for the group to be oh yeah, the wizard's busy off giving a lecture tour right now, so we can't go do this. We shouldn't probably do this thing that's super dangerous.
That would
but we
still
can
be
work on
difficult.
Objective.
You would have to have scrupulous stopping points.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't make sense for the wizard to just in between Dungeon Floor 1 and 2 of the Caverns of Chaos to have the wizard go to a lecture tour somehow on their own, and then the Caverns of Chaos got easier, or they just were we'll abandon the Caverns of Chaos.
Yeah, but that's why I was thinking about this more for a sandboxy thing with smaller bite-sized chunks, and you're choosing different quests that you're doing. You can be oh, this is the quest that we're focusing on right now. But it really depends upon what your group's policy is for when folks aren't there. If you have a policy where it's okay, if they're not there, then their character is kind of around but distracted by something else. So they'll cast the buffs that they always cast, or do some of the things that they always do, and then kind of head off. So then you can justify them being there.
Yep.
Or say, oh, they were actually there all along for this reason. But they just didn't, or they were running slightly behind you, and they caught up with you on day 2 while you were going through the dungeon or what have you.
But I'd say pretty much no group, and it would be a GM who's just beleaguered, actually has the entire world mapped out completely in advance, in complete violation of the first rule of dungeon craft to not create more than you actually need to. And so I think most people are like Nightbeer from chat, who are just when it's a Schrodinger's cat, until you open the box, you don't know what's inside of the box. And similarly, until the players start getting interested or interact with something or are close to interacting it, then you don't need to figure everything out yet.
Now, one thing to point out about that is people's attitudes toward where sort of the line on some of these things can be very different for a homebrew adventure versus a published adventure. Because some folks can be well, that's not running it as written.
Yes, so there's a very weird attitude about this. I've seen it before. My little brother, at one point, he was running for a hyper-optimized Pathfinder 1 group through the Rise of the Runelords Anniversary Edition. And so they're just Rise of the Runelords just has some encounters that are more difficult than other encounters, for sure. And he would sometimes adjust the encounters too, because his group was very optimized. but sometimes the encounters were hard even when he didn't adjust them. And so after an encounter, if it was hard, his players were just like, did you make this NPC or was it in there? And one of the ones that wrecked them the most was just in there. And he was like, it was in there. Like, oh, okay, never mind. That's fine because it was in the book.
Yeah.
And it was just like, why does it
Why does
matter
it
that
matter?
much
Yeah.
if it was in the book? And then if he made it, he was like, how could you? You made it too hard. So it's like there's nothing that's that special about the fact that it's in the book. In fact, something that was made by your GM, if they are relatively skilled with understanding your group, is pretty likely to be more calibrated to your group than what's in the book. What's in the book is just like some kind of an attempt at a generic average, especially in Pathfinder 1, where groups were just so far away that they weren't playing the same game. In Pathfinder 2, groups are relatively close, so the book is probably close to being correct.
Yeah, but still, like, you know, if you're, I mean, there's some limitations to this within the context of organized play, of course, but like if you're running, you know, an adventure path or other things for your game, you know, taking what's in that adventure path and customizing it and making your own for your group is going to be the way to go.
Another reason to retcon things, so we were talking about things here which were like kind of Schrodinger's fudging, where you didn't decide yet and now you decide something that's more interesting, which you could also consider to be a retcon if you did kind of decide but you weren't sure. But another reason to retcon is because of the fact that the players are not their characters. Yes. And so just one of the classic examples of, like, you are just, this is not social contract, you are just literally a bad GM if you don't retcon this, is if the players are like, okay, so we're walking around in the area, and then one of them is like, alright, so I'm going to walk 20 feet to the north and then look from there, because we're on this hill. And then the GM's like, okay, do you die if you take 395 damage?
And it's like, what?
What? Why would that matter? And be like, well, you it was an 800-foot fall off the cliff that you walked 20 feet off of, and you reduced the falling distance by 10 feet, and then you have it because of your special ability to reduce the falling distance for 10 feet with catfall, and then you take 395 falling damage. And that's more than twice your hit points, right? Because you're level 2, so you're dead. And it's like they noted to be just like, we're not going to tell you mostly during this episode that you're wrong, no matter how you fudge your retcon, but if you don't retcon that, you're wrong, and you probably were wrong to even say that unless it was a joke in the first place.
Yeah, because there's some things it was like the characters can obviously perceive them, and like in that case, it's like, as a GM, you know, you didn't describe things in a way that it was clear to that player, or the player maybe spaced out and wasn't paying attention or whatever. Either way, you know, you need to make sure you're on the same page about, like, what is the shape of the physical reality. And then in addition to the physical reality, there's also sort of the knowledge base. And an assumption that the characters are going to be more invested in what's going on because it's their lives than the players. Like, you know, if you had your last session a month ago, and, you know, the players learned an important piece of information, and then a character is starting to act in a way that's contrary to that piece of information, then, you know, reminding them, like, hey, you know, when you investigated this in the past, like, you know, you learn, it's like, you know, last session your characters learned that, you know, this NPC is allergic to peanuts, and you just gave, so, like, you still want to give her the peanut cake, and then they can be like, yeah, we do, but, like, because they're terrible people. But, like, you know, then you make sure that, like, it's consistent with it.
Yeah, or similarly, if, like, the PCs are talked to, like, a spy in the court who works for them, who is just like, the Vizier is evil, and he's going to offer you a toast. In 5 minutes, it's going to be poisoned with a deadly poison that will kill you. Don't drink it. And then 2 months later, you have your next session because you had to stop.
Yeah.
And it starts with, everyone, I, the Vizier, would like to make a toast to our brave heroes. The barbarian and the rogue are like, we drink it. as the GM, you might want to be like, hold on.
It's just so you remember.
Just so you remember.
From last time, this person
for
said
your
this.
character 5 minutes ago.
This happened.
Literally, the spy master came in and told you that the vizier has poisoned the drinks and that they will kill you.
And then the barbarian.
Might be like, my fortitude save is really high. I'm gonna still drink it.
And then the rogue is like, right.
Rogue is like, I'll use my sleight of hand to pretend to drink it.
Yeah, but then you make sure that they're making decisions based on like having an understanding of the world. Like for me personally, that kind of the ability to do that kind of retcon is critical, because otherwise, like, I would feel like it's like, oh yeah, I'm not really playing my character, because there's no way in heck that my character would have forgotten this very important thing just because, like, we last played this game 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm. Nightbeer is always worried about doing those kind of retcons, or like at least pauses and warnings, because you may be implicitly telling someone what's important if it's not obvious yet. It's true, but the thing is that your players are not their characters. They do not have the same common sense of the world. So at some points, it's your responsibility as the GM to represent the common sense of the world. And if the player wants to go against the common sense of the world, that's okay. And it could be a great session to explore, like the barbarian be like, no, yeah, I know it was poison. I'm gonna drink it, but I'm gonna look the vizier straight in the eye and then drink the whole thing.
Yes.
And then you're gonna remember that, especially when the barbarian rolls, if the barbarian rolls a natural 1 and dies.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that. This is like, you know, this and the cliff are examples that are pretty far on the end of, like, you have been, your character explicitly would know that this is a dangerous thing because they've been directly told, they've been directly told this is dangerous. For things that are more like, well, you know, this is a mystery and you're not really sure, like, oh, if I highlight this NPC, is it going to seem like they're too significant? I would recommend taking a look at the role of beginning of session recaps and things like that, so that you can recap a variety of things, which includes some of those things that are important, and also like some other things that are going on that they might want to know. So like, instead of being like, remember, this person really likes clothing that's the color red, you know, but then but you can then tailor it more to what people ask. If people are like, oh yeah, did we know anything about what this person likes? And you could be like, yeah, you know, a couple sessions ago, your bar did a recall knowledge on their interests and found out XYZ.
So a lot of RPGs have a line somewhere in the Game Master Guide that's always like, figure out if this is something that they should need to roll for, and if it is, do a roll. And if it's not interesting to roll for it, you can give it to them for free, right? And I'm going to use that advice for Nightbeer here, which is that you could potentially put a roll in if you think it's something that's worthy of a roll, and if not, then not. Here's an example. Let's say that there's an enemy who's like an evil baker, and the evil baker is like, has baking something on the stove's top, and then they leave for a second, and the thief is like, okay, so we want to steal the evil baker's stove. So I grab the stove top right now. He could come back. And so you could decide, okay, should I remind the thief player that since a stove was just being used, that the stove top is very hot? Probably very hot, which, like, even it's the stereotypical thing that young children learn by putting their hand on the stove automatically. And maybe you should, but maybe it's a perception check to feel the waves of heat emanating from the stove, and it's a DC 5 perception check that the rogue could make, or something like that. You can decide what you want to do there. And even after you tell the rogue, they might be like, oh yeah, I know. I might take some fire damage, but I'll get that stove out before the evil baker comes back.
So you could also like sort of ask a clarifying question to get them thinking about the plans. Like, all right, you know, how are you planning to pick up and carry the stove?
And then they're just like, I'm gonna grab it with my hand and then lift it up and then drag it out as quietly as possible. And then if they didn't say anything about it, you can be like, you can point out that their character would remember from their experience with stoves that it was probably hot since it was just in use, and then let them decide what they want to do about that. And it could be nothing, or it could be, yeah, I'll take precautions, or it's because my gloves of elven kind were created by elves, and they have 6 layers of heat and cold protection and anti-perspiration.
Or, you know, like they go in to pick up the stove, and it's like, you know, as your hands approach the stove, you remember that, see, you
remember fire hot.
You remember fire hot. You have quick reflexes, so you're able to pull your hands away before you burn yourself.
Yes.
And then they can say, oh, no, I'm just going to grab it anyway. And then it's like, all right.
So the thing about official retcons is everyone always understands that you're doing them if it's an official retcon and you're explaining, hey, this is a retcon, we're going back. Or, oh yeah, that makes sense that I gave the wrong information for this. Or I rolled with the wrong modifier and that caused this to be a crit that killed your character, so we're going to bring you back to life. We're just going to retcon it and you're here now. Like, if that's your group social contract, you can do it. If it's not, and you're just like, nope, well, we had the wrong modifier, but you're still dead, that's your social contract. Those are both fine, but everyone will generally know it's a retcon. Whereas with fudging, the thing that can get you into real trouble is that fudging can be done pretty quietly or under the table. Or, I mean, sometimes literally on the table, but behind the screen.
Behind a screen, yeah.
And if you do that, especially when you violate your group's social contract, then you're actually not fudging when you violate this group social contract by my definition is, because some people ask, like, when is it fudging, when is it just cheating, and what is it just cheating with good PR? I say anytime you fudge and it's against the group's social contract or not in the social contract, you just didn't discuss anything ahead of time, you just did it, then that's probably cheating. Yes. Whereas anytime you do it and it was disclosed that that was a kind of fudging that the group wants to do, and everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Then it's always not cheating.
Yeah, like,
that's
my personally opinion. Like, you know, sometimes you see the advice that's like, oh yeah, you know, you can fudge dice, just don't let the players find out. And to me, like, the idea of having any kind of GM practice that has just deceive your friends as part of the advice is like, no way.
That's also, even this advice I just gave is partially connected to my social contract. So I think that if you want to let people know that you're doing it, then that's one thing. And if you think, well, but how could I do it? I can't run the game if I can't just change the dice. Then make a mechanic for it that make it part of the social contract. If you think your group won't like it, if it's just that, oh yeah, I just changed the numbers so they win by a little bit every time, then make like a benevolent game master points. They're like hero points, and the game master gives it to themselves a certain number, and you know how many that there are, and they can use them to re-roll a die roll when it seems too harsh, right? Or you can be malevolent game master. They can be for anything. They can be to fudge in your villain's behalf too. Maybe you have a set of these points that can be used for the bad guys that is a certain number, and whenever you decide to fudge on your PC's favor by re-rolling, it gives extra ones for the villains later or something like that. So it's like kind of karma, and it balances out over time. Like, you can come up with a mechanical way of doing it if you're like, I want to do it, and I would normally do it secretly, but Arcade Mark told me not to do it secretly, but my players will get mad if I just tell them I'm just changing it capriciously. Then make a meta mechanic. I mean, hero points are a meta mechanic to let players take control and do that, right? So I think that can be done. However, there's room for other opinions, and I get that for some people the idea of fudge but do it secretly is part of the way that they do things, even if it's not what I like to see when it comes to die rolling fudging. Obviously, when it comes to something that's just sort of like you hadn't quite decided where these other people are on their patrol route and how close they are and when they exactly going to hear, that's just something that is part of the ongoing narrative. So Nightbeer says, is rolling a couple times on a weathered table because you want something interesting fudging? I would say that if it's not something that actually has an impact on, like, the success or failure of the characters or their opponents, and it's just like, I'm rolling on a D100 table of inspirational ideas for weather, or for plot lines, or for the NPC's quirk, or for, like, the name of the dungeon on one of those dungeon name D100.
And then you're like,
that.
yeah, this inspiration, I didn't like it. I'm going to pick a different one.
I think that rolling multiple times of that is completely fine and is not fudging because they're just rolling for... You have that table for inspiration. You don't have that table as a strict part of the game. Now, if you're playing a game that has a D100 table that is really important to it, like let's say that one of your players is a weathermancer, and their thing is that when the skies are clear, their magic works normally, but if it has anything else, then their magic could be difficult to use. And you're like, well, but the weather is so boring because I rolled... Calm weather is only 60% chance, but I rolled it 10 times in a row. Nah, I'm gonna keep rolling until... tornado!
Yeah.
That's interesting. Now, that could be a problem when the weathermancer now is, tornado. That means you need a DC 16 flat check to cast any spells, although they do extra damage if you succeed. But since they fail, like, 75% of the time, it's not worth it. So, if it's just about inspiration...
Yeah, it looks like that is sort of like using a random weather generator to help you figure things out.
Then, I'd say just roll until you get something just sort of like, interested in if it's for inspiration.
Yeah, like, and I see it sort of like if you had like a, random events table or random encounter table and you roll on that and you're like, that's not going to be interesting. It's like... I rolled on a random encounter table and I got something that I know my party's just going to curb stomp and it's not going to be worth our time. But I've decided, right now is a good time to have a random encounter for the plot and the pacing. So, one thing that you can do on those tables is take a look and be like, what are the options on this table that I would think would be interesting? And then make like a renumbering of it for your purposes, or just say, I think, this is a random encounter table where 1 is the easiest encounter and 100 is the hardest, and anything that's under 30 in this table is going to be too easy for the PCs at their point. So if I roll anything under 30, I'm just going to reroll.
Yep. So there's lots of ways that you can handle that.
Or we'll say that they recounted that one and then you roll again.
Maybe it's just too similar.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just like, we've
seen
fought
this already.
bandits a million times.
We need to do something else. So you take them off the
or
list or
if
say
it's
I'm going to roll
easy,
that.
You could just be like, all right, guys, that for some reason there was a random encounter that happened to be with like 3 regular deer. I'm not sure why they put that in here. You obviously win against 3 regular deer. So I'd like the ranger, who is the best hunter of the group and probably noticed these deer in advance, to narrate to me how you were able to hunt these deer and take them down before they ran away. And just tell me how you did it. We're not going to run an encounter with deer. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and then you have, you have some extra hides and you have some tasty meat for dinner, and then you can roll a different random encounter. Yeah. That can be the one that they
now we'll roll to see what you actually fight.
Yes.
Yes. But you did encounter the deer, just to be clear. We're just not...
Because sometimes, it can be fun to have those things that are the PCs just curb stomp, whether it's something that you actually want to play out the trivial encounter or just have it be handled in a more narrative fashion.
People said unless it's a deer or Eldamon. That's true. I mean, if you encounter the grim white stag Eldamon, then you might just die because all of its attacks will kill you if they bring you to 0 hit points. There's other ways you can deal with these kind of encounters that are similar to, like, let's say you're in that situation where you just fought like a ton of bandits, and you fought so many bandit encounters, and you roll another bandit random encounter, and what are the odds, right? And the PCs are even just so much higher level than the bandits at this point as well. You could just turn it into an encounter that allows people to roleplay a little bit, and then don't actually roll out the combat of it, where you just have the bandits be like, your money or your life! And then they jump out, and then they see the PCs, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is the Bandit Slayer group.
And then they try to run, and then they suddenly it's dead.
Like, ah!
And I can see something where it's like, and then suddenly you turn it into a little chase scene about trying to catch all of them before they escape.
Yes.
Because your victory is not in contention.
Or you have a role play where the group intimidates them or yells at them, and then talk about how the group mops them up.
Yeah, and maybe the fact that you've rolled bandits 4 times in a row on the random encounter chart means that there's like a larger bandit organization that's behind the scenes, and then the PCs can start finding clues about that, and then you move.
Yep, Rohit said that basically happened in Critical Role. Yeah, I'm not surprised. How do you want to do this? Right? Isn't that a very Critical Role Matt Mercer thing to say? It definitely works. It definitely works for GMs, whether or not you're Matt Mercer. Although if you are Matt Mercer, it probably works even better for you.
It's true.
Because you have people who are like actors who, when you ask them how they want to do this, they're definitely
gonna have
know.
a fun and creative answer.
Yeah, they definitely know how they want to do this. So, yeah, I would say just in general that usually re-rolling, if you're re-rolling an inspirational D100 roll because it didn't inspire you enough, that's generally not fudging. But there are certain situations you want to pay close attention to it. For example, let's say that you're re-rolling because you're like, oh my gosh, zombies, I don't like undead. And you re-roll to, it's like, they're so stereotypical. You keep re-rolling all the undead encounters. But meanwhile, there's someone in your group who has the Undead Slayer archetype from Book of the Dead.
Yeah.
This could be an issue if you kept re-rolling all the undead encounters into, like, shambling mounds or something.
And then
like
they don't get to fight their things.
They're like, darn it, we heard that the Gravelands had a lot of undead,
we
but
just started
we haven't
into
found any undead, even
Yeah.
though we actually went to the Gravelands. I thought there were like 80% of the random encounter tables at the Gravelands, and then you're just kind of whistling, oh yeah, no undead here in the Gravelands.
So yeah, think about like why you're taking things off of the list of random possibilities and what impact that would have.
Yes, but normally,
yeah.
Linda and I can find the quarter case to any quarter
Yes.
case, but normally if you're just re-rolling for inspiration,
I like that.
that's
Rico
fine.
says they're Grapelands.
Yes, that's right. It was a typo on your map.
That's the
said
shambling
Gravelands.
mounds, and like the wine leshies or whatever.
Yes, that you wrote V instead of P because of the fact that a V is similar to a B, and a B and a P.
Vine leshy vintner.
The B and the P sound are very similar sounds, just depending on like the voicedness and of what you do with them and where the breath mark goes, right? So that's how
you got like a party of Don Quixote's
mistranscribed.
Tilting at windmills and expecting they're going into like things that are super dangerous, but actually
they were going to the Grapelands.
Yes, there's Grapelands all along.
It was just a vineyard from Taldor. Although
go.
actually those tend to have more undead than the Gravelands.
Yeah. Oh, Taldor.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think to summarize everything we've been saying, it's that fudging especially can be difficult to define, and you want to talk to your group about it. But fudging and retcons you want to talk to your group about anyway, because you want to figure out what the definition is. You want to figure out what your group accepts and even what your group encourages in terms of fudging and retcons, and what your group will not accept. Because ultimately, also, if you could actually have a social contract about fudging die rolls without the group knowing, if the answer to when you're talking about fudging is your group is like, you know what? Maybe you're fudging, maybe you're not. I don't want to know about it.
Yeah.
And they all say, yeah, we agree with that. Just don't say anything either way, and we do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
That could be your group social contract. I was trying to think about, like, when we said be open and honest, how could that go with some groups that want to do it in secret? That could be your social contract. And if your group says just like, we have no problem with fudging die rolls, but then you decide to do it but do it secretly, that's also probably okay. Yeah. Whereas if you talk to your group, it's like, what do you guys think about fudging and retcons? And one person says,
it ruins the game.
I hate fudging. It ruins everything. If I find out that even one die roll was fudged, literally every minute that I spent has just become tarnished and corrupted, and all my good memories of the campaign are over. And then you decide to secretly fudge. I'm like, yeah, but that player is bad at noticing when I fudge behind my GM
It's actually
screen.
not that far from the anti-fudging stance of one of our players from our original group.
Basically is what he said.
Yeah.
I was not trying to make a parodical example. I was trying to say what he said to us.
Yeah.
About his anti-fudging stance, which, you know what, was similar to the way we did things anyway, but was his anti-fudging stance. And so at that point, if you're like, yeah, whatever, they're still never going to notice, then you've really gone against the group's social contract. That is an issue. And the problem is that some groups don't have this discussion. And so they have a person who's like our former player who has that opinion. They don't know that they do. And then they do the secret fudging, and then it gets found out, and there's a giant explosion.
Yeah.
As with everything in life, communication is the key. And if you have good communication, you communicate in advance, that can forestall so many possible problems that can happen later on. And see, Rohit in chat says it's basically their attitude as well is a very similar one. So, yeah, I think that there's a decent number of people who are like that. Like, I do not want fudging at all on die rolls, but I'm maybe not that as extreme as that player, that it may not tarnish every memory I had of the entire campaign. I can still feel good about like the role play,
even though it does cast into doubt like the legitimacy of success,
all the legitimacy of all the close calls and successes.
Yeah,
which it will hurt it a decent amount for me, but I would not go quite to the extreme that everything is ruined from the entire campaign. All the happy memories are gone and burned. So I'm a little bit I'm not as extreme as that seemingly out there example, but that it sounds like some people in chat and people we know do have that. And if you think, oh my gosh, I thought Mark was doing his usual where he just makes up a thing, but there are actually people like that. I never knew that. I've always been fudging secretly and I've never asked anybody. Maybe I need to because I could accidentally have run out with someone like that. Then maybe that's the most important thing we told you in this entire episode. Is to realize that some people are that extreme. And we said it, and one of the, few people who were watching the stream at this time also had the same opinion.
Yeah.
So, it really is true, and I really, really suggest figuring out the social contract. Because I know this. You who are watching this, who do die fudging secretly, you don't want to make players upset. You've done it for your group and they've been happy, and maybe you never talked to them and they've still been happy because they like the results, because your die fudging makes things very exciting and they're always just in the nick of time thanks to the die fudging and anything like that, right? I get it. And even if you ask people, you don't have to lose that necessarily, because of the fact that you can say, what are you guys' opinion on fudging and retcons? And as long as they don't have a negative opinion, you don't have to tell them, I intend to die fudge anytime that there's, even on a fight where it could be an earned loss for your group. Because, there's some people who are like, I won't fudge against the big villain where it could be an earned loss. But if a weird random kobold who happened to have a fatal weapon just arbitrarily nat 20s 3 times in a row, they make 3 attacks, they're all nat 20s.
Yeah.
And they kill.
And they're like, well, that doesn't make for a good story if you die to the kobold.
That's just so capricious
with the
of the 1 in 8,000 chance.
Yeah.
I know that there's some people who are like that. And then they
there's another example in chat that for someone for whom it's a sliding scale based on factors like, did the GM do this to cancel out a different non-dice based issue, like accidentally bringing in an unbalanced encounter, and then was trying to put things back more toward a how it should have been type situation.
Right. And look, I get it. Even I've accidentally brought in unbalanced encounters. I know that people are like, well, it's Mark Seifter. He's like a person or something who does things. You
are indeed like a person and something who does
but
things.
But no, I've brought in unbalanced encounters. When I try to rebalance for that, though, instead of using die fudging, I will do something else that is in the narrative to deal with it, because, well, I brought an unbalanced encounter in the narrative. So.
One of the ones that you definitely use sometimes is enemies who are winning by enough can get a little bit contemptuous or try to go for a higher degree of victory.
That's correct. Also, just enemies who are winning by enough might want to do something that it still has a cost, but it prevents a TBK. For example, oftentimes if an enemy does a malice move, stealing or destroying an item from somebody, or killing someone who's on the ground, which I usually never do in Pathfinder 2, it uses up a lot of actions, and the dying system is already going to penalize people enough that it's usually not worth it if you're trying to actually win. But if you're sure you're going to win, maybe an enemy does a move like that, kill one person to save everybody. And that's a little more vicious than normal. Normally for me, if I knew I unbalanced it, it could be that just something else comes in that's a third party that doesn't like the PCs or the other thing, and then but it comes in on the side that's near the enemies and starts attacking everybody.
Or, in the same way that PCs might go into an encounter and be like, oh my gosh, this is deadly, we have to pull out all the stops, or, oh, this is less deadly, we can use some more non-lethal tactics here. Yep. Maybe the NPCs want to capture the PCs, and then
and Rico said the NPCs might be just like, oh, this was a low threat or trivial encounter, so I'll save my best spells at this point. We've got this.
Yeah, like who knows if there's gonna be more of these more of these
random humans
coming in and attacking.
Well, I don't know why we had to fight these 4 humans, but I'm not gonna waste my best spells for this. We can just use cantrips at this point.
Yeah. And then if they are not all using their best resources because they're not taking the PCs seriously, that can also make it easier for the PCs to escape the situation when they realize that, oh, darn, this is a problem.
And Nightbeer says that they feel fudging is such a hot topic because outcomes are so binary, as in death or life. And while people swear by riding the chaos of the dice, it can just produce anticlimactic stories. So really, the way you ask that question leads into the reason why you want to check the social contract, right?
Yeah.
Because for some people, it's all about whether the story is anticlimactic or not. Whereas for other people, it's hilarious that they got killed by a kobold that rolled 3 20s in a row. That only happens once every 8,000 times. And it's something they'll never forget. And that's actually what, for one person's anticlimax, which it totally could be, just this random mook kobold that was in a tunnel. It was considered like a throwaway encounter, random encounter. And that would be so frustrating if they wanted to tell, like, the next, like, lengthy epic tale. Like, they were trying to tell an Iliad where, yeah, sure, Achilles can die, but it's gonna be, like, when the gods, like, steady a hand against his one weakness, not when the kobold hits with the thing, right? Or like the Mahabharata, where you use an arrow, and that arrow was like a snake that was previously angry at that one guy for being mean to it as a snake, and agreed to become an arrow who would be able to shoot at them. And it's like, sometimes it's really epic, and it's all tied back to your past and the decisions that you made. And some people want that if it's a death that feels earned. But for some people, they want to tell a story where, yeah, death could just come randomly at any time. Where, like, you could have somebody who's, like, a king who's accidentally killed because people were, like, throwing rotten vegetables at him and hit him in the head wrong.
Yeah.
Where the dice can tell something weird and unexpected. And those are sometimes just different crowds who have different preferences and sometimes play different games from each other, with very, very narrative games on one side where death is actually usually not in the cards unless you, like, specifically say, I choose to die. And the other end of that is probably like OSR style games where everything is on random tables and there's very emergent play from die rolls. And Pathfinder 2 and 5e are kind of in the middle between those two. They try to do both sides for some groups and be all things for everyone, and as a result, you get people playing who have very different play styles, and you need to check with your players to see where they're at.
So, what are some strategies for, let's say you talk to your group, and you have players who have very different preferences in that regard?
So, if you have a group, and let's say you have 4 players, and 3 of them are like, I just don't care, and one of them is just like, fudging will make it so my entire memories of all of you have been ruined, and on this group, I'll feel bad about it every time I think about it, and I'll just try never to think about it again.
So then obviously you don't fudge, because there's no one who...
You need to, like, nobody really wanted you to fudge.
Yeah.
You may have. So you need to decide, let's say you kind of wanted to. You should decide whether to, have someone else GM / like GM for not that player who doesn't want the fudging, or to not fudge because one of the players really, really didn't want you to fudge. Let's say one person is just like, I need the fudge. I need it. We need fudging for us. I'm not going to die to a kobold because it was very unlucky. Yes, it's 1 in 8,000, but we're the PCs. We fight and we get more than 8,000 times that enemies are going to try to do things to us. So, statistically, it's eventually going to happen. If you just let the dice fall as they may, you must have fudging. And the other person is like, you must not have fudging. So then you're going to run into some issues. You may want to split into the fudge group and the no fudge group. and have the fudge group do fudging and the no fudge group do no fudging.
Or
it's not necessarily going to work if you're like, well, only fudge for Fudgio over here. Because if you fudge for Fudgio, then that makes the whole party win. And in a way that probably makes Fudgio stronger than everybody else because Fudgio is getting fudging on their behalf.
But there may be certain things you can do with things like the mechanic that you were talking about before that are like, you know, the help the PC's points and the against the PC's points where you put in, because if what the one player is fundamentally saying is, I need fudging because I need my character to not die to like a way for my character to not die to like some random thing. And then the person who says, you know, I need there to not be fudging because I need us to be operating under a consistent and fair set of mechanics so that I feel that our victories are earned.
So my example of having GM rerolls that are codified, I think would work based on my knowledge of the player I'm thinking of. Rico wonders if Fudgio likes fudging because of their name or if it's a great cosmic coincidence.
If so, there's a lot of cosmic coincidences in the names of our example hypothetical players, yeah.
That's true. That's absolutely true. So yeah, I think that you can find a way, but the only way to find a way is to figure out what people think by having an honest conversation with them. If you don't, and you find out that you have Fudgio and anti-Fudgio at your table, or I guess you wouldn't find out until you either fudged or you didn't, and Fudgio gets mad because the kobold killed him in a weird random encounter, or anti-Fudgio gets mad because they noticed that you were fudging. So, like, basically, all of this comes down to have a conversation, figure out what your group wants, determine the social contract, play in a way that works for you and your group, and do try to be gentle a little bit with retcons unless your group really just gets too distracted by them, because you are the window into the world for your group, and they're not actually there. But you can phrase retcons in some senses, like if you do it right away before you describe what happens from their action, as sort of like a warning or that their character thought of something, by either giving it to them for free or even giving them a d20 roll to remember information that might cause them to change their mind.
And now there's a comment from chat. I do wonder if sometimes fudging is just way easier than having a more creative solution to the player's situation. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it can definitely, like, especially in some of these hard encounter situations, it can come down to the GM being like, I don't know how that number that I just rolled is consistent with a good outcome.
Yep. But there are other ways. So, like, there are creative ways to deal with the group situation. Then there are ways that are tried and true. And fudging is a tried and true way, even if it's actually, like, literally harmful to some groups depending on your social contract. There's other tried and true ways that you could use if you have to, though. So if you can't think of anything else, and your group doesn't want you to fudge, and they're in a tough scrape because of a bad situation, and it's not like you can lower enemy reinforcements because there are no enemy reinforcements, and it's not like they could do a different tactic because they're a mindless creature that says that they literally attack every time, and that's already enough that it's going to kill the PCs. And it's not, and the group said no fudging hit points, and or you don't want to fudge hit points, and or they know how many hit points they have for some reason. And all of these other things, you could still go back to a type of fudge/retcon that is as old as theater in ancient Greece, and do a Deus Ex Machina, where it doesn't have to be a literal Deus Ex Machina where the gods just give you a intervention, although it could be. And there were actually points in Pathfinder 1st edition for getting gods to be happy with you, and then having Deus Ex Machinas like queued up that would be like earned Deus Ex Machinas. But you could have a Deus Ex Machina where just somebody comes and saves the characters. And if you just had to pull that out there and you have no idea why or what they are, you can just also stop the session. Like, if you just are desperate and you don't know and your group doesn't want you to fudge, and you're just like, suddenly these black and crimson flames come out of nowhere and incinerate the beast. And that's where we stop for today. And then you're like, oh crap, where did they come from?
What do they want?
What do they want?
What is going to be the cost of their
What
assistance?
is the cost of their assistance?
Because if you use those kinds of things, to make sure that things still feel earned, you'd want there to be some kind of a cost. Like, they helped you, and therefore now they have interest in you. They noticed you. You owe them, etc.
Yep. And if you could plan things out more in advance, or figure out what it actually is during the session, then you can probably make a little more to it. Like, let's say I decided during the session maybe like it was like devils, and so if the PCs are losing, and then they hear a voice that's like, "Do you need some help? I could help you in exchange for a favor. Is that okay?" And then someone's like, "Yes, that's okay." It's like, very well. I consider that a verbal contract.
And then they've just brought themselves into infernal contract, and they're gonna have to figure that out.
It may not be for their soul, because they did say in exchange for a favor and not a soul, but they now owe a favor to this contract devil that helped them out. And so you can always find some, as we've said in many other episodes about killing PCs, you can always find something more interesting than death to do. And it doesn't have to be that the outcome is all sunshine and roses just because of the fact that you came up with something to help prevent a battle catastrophe that it looked like your group didn't want, but they also didn't want you to fudge. And Nightbear says having a warlock in 5e is basically a blank check for Deus Ex Machina. And a witch in Pathfinder 2 could be the same way, because they have a mysterious patron that could do something.
I could also see like some kind of an overload with an oracle too.
Yep, you could. There are a lot of things. Or you could have like a cleric's deity put their thumb on the scale. You could have a bard's muse if they're actually a literal.
Oh no, they made a PF2 class for warlock. That's really cool.
Okay, well then in that case,
is it on Infinite or where is it?
It would be a blank check for Deus Ex Machina in PF2 as well. But yeah, absolutely. Basically, just any time that there's some kind of weird entity that's looking out for you, you could do it. So, like, elemental avatars have a powerful Eldamon that's sleeping inside of them, and normally, like, there's some feats you can take that do, like, a few things with it, and obviously all your fire powers, if you're a fire avatar, come from that. But, like, you wouldn't have the Eldamon just suddenly come out and do something, but you could do it if you want. And Rohit points out Animist is an example of this, and that's another example, good example, too. Like, honestly, the elemental avatar and the Animist have some things in common in the sense that both of them have something that's sort of disembodied. Although the Avatar does, like, the powers themselves for the most part, the Animist also is spellcasting, but they're sort of also using those spirits, which I can't remember the correct name for, but it's not Phantom and it's not Spirit, it's something else that's similar. So yeah, absolutely. Anytime that you have something like that, you can come up with some kind of way out of things. There are ways other than fudging, and they're usually more interesting than fudging. Mm-hmm. But if your group likes fudging, fudging is simpler, and you can keep moving on, and it doesn't, like, change the story beat. All right. Linda, did you have anything else about fudging or retcons to say? In that case, let's say goodbye to YouTube, and then let's continue with Twitch. Bye, YouTube!
Bye!